All right. So he's one of the most controversial figures in the sport. He's one of the best fighters of all time. In my opinion, he is the number one GOAT in our sport, regardless of all the controversy. His name is John
Oh, George.
Jones.
Oh, never mind. Sorry. Keep going.
His name is John Jones, and I think it's time we do a brief timeline, brief history of John Jones, how we got here, and what his current status is. So I want to rewind the clock back to UFC 87 in 2008 when John
Wow.
Jones made his debut. Since then, he's been on an absolute tear. He was beating up legends of the sport, only a few fights into the UFC. He rose through the light heavyweight division in a time when it was the most stacked division on the planet. You had Rampage Jackson, you had Lyoto Machida, you had Rashad Evans, Shogun, all these legends in the sport, and John Jones was basically running through them like a hot knife through butter. He was beating up people, beating them at their own game, outstriking Alexander Gustafsson. He was dirty boxing Glover Teixeira. He was out wrestling Daniel Cormier. He was really doing everything. He was submitting TRT Vitor Belfort when he was the scariest guy in the sport. And so, you think about where he's been through all the controversy. He's, from testing positive for banned substances, I think about 4 times if you include cocaine and the 3 PEDs. He's feuded with Daniel Cormier. He's been arrested, pulled over for drunk driving many, many times. He hit a pregnant woman and left the scene of the crime.
Details, right?
Minor details, right? So, he's been quite polarizing. And, despite all that, I think he's still extremely popular with the fans and just sort of embraces that role as the heel. And so you look at where he was, sort of the pinnacle of the sport, and his last couple fights, like you mentioned on our other segment, he hasn't fought through the pandemic at all, and his last couple fights he's looked human. He hasn't looked like the old John Jones, and I think some people believe that he's maybe just not motivated. He doesn't care because he hasn't really lost many rounds even his entire career, and the guys he's fighting don't really have the same high-level brand names as some of his older opponents, whether it's Chael Sonnen, Machida, all these different names. And so I think that begs the question now. He is moving up to heavyweight, allegedly. We see him putting on weight, working out, posting on his social media. What is the future for John Jones? Where do we see him landing? Is he going back to light heavyweight? Is he ever going to fight in the UFC? Is he really that focused on or upset with what the UFC is offering him? What do you think is going to happen with John Jones?
Well, first off, thank you for that beautiful lead-in. But I mean, this is such a perplexing question, right? There's two kind of polarizing ways to look at it. Like you said, he's had an unbelievable career. We can easily argue that he's undefeated. But then you can talk about his last 2 fights, which people can easily argue that he lost. And they're not in his record as losses. However, that's not the momentum you want to be having. So he naturally puts this weight on, and we go on Instagram and see him lifting and boxing and hitting pads and stuff, and he looks great. I mean, he's always looked great, and he's not really that skinny John anymore. Now he is bulky. He loves to lift. But we even have Dana White even saying that he can jump right into a title fight, and he got offered, so everything going according to plan, right? Well, not exactly. He didn't take it. He asked for money. His fights hadn't been selling particularly well. That one probably would have sold well because a lot of people would have think that he would lose that. He probably would not have been the favorite against Francis. Would he have the tools to beat Francis? Absolutely. He is John Jones, despite the few negatives that I was just bringing up. But there comes a time where he was recently offered the Stipe fight. He turned that down. Where if you want to be the best, you have to fight. It's pretty simple. He's talked about wanting to make more money, but there's a good way to make more money is fight more often too. I understand the risk and the danger, and I know he's kind of talked about those things with Francis, but he's had risk and danger his whole career. 20-something fights. He's been up, like you mentioned, up against the toughest guys, and he's fought them. So he's put himself in a strange position. Like the rest of us, he's actually not getting younger with time. He's only getting older, and his prime can be wasting away. And I'll also say, heavyweight is a unique division in the sport because every other weight class, you're going to be within a few pounds. Heavyweight, you have a ton of range in what you can be. And he's putting on, so much. Any other weight class, you're going to be adding, what, 10, 15 pounds. Here he can add 40 pounds, possibly. We don't know what that'll look like as a finished product. He's not going to have a warm up fight if he walks right into Francis. Hitting pads is one thing, but going there with a killer like the current champion Ngannou, there's so much mystery around the whole thing. I mean, you and I talk about it every MMA podcast and show and personality is talking about it. It's a fight we want to see. It's in John's hands, but it does feel strange that he just hasn't opened the door with the key that they're putting in his hand.
Yeah, and I think you could argue both sides. I think, like I said, I think he's the greatest to ever do it. Look at his resume. Does he deserve the pay that he wants? I would say from like a body of work and sort of carrying the flag of the UFC being their most dominant fighter for years, yes. But at the same time, he's been a huge liability to the UFC.
Yeah. I'm going to say no to that, but I'll go after you.
Yeah, I'd say, part of me thinks that Dana White is just like, hey, like I'm not going to pay you all this money when we've had multiple instances of you ruining cards, blowing up the entire card for everyone.
Yep.
With poor decisions. And so does he – I mean, he can probably has enough money to sit out for a while. Maybe he never needs to even fight again, but he's under contract, and they're not going to cut him. Like
right.
They're not going to cut John Jones. They're not going to let him go to Bellator. And so I think Dana White and the UFC probably have the power in this situation.
But they've worked with him, I will say.
Yeah. I don't think
options.
They need him, though. I don't think
they do or they don't. Sorry.
I don't think they need him.
I don't think so either.
I think part of me wonders too with those last two fights. The hardcore fan me wants to believe that it just wasn't motivated John Jones.
Yep.
And we need the savage John Jones to come back. If he does, he could beat Francis. He could beat Stipe. He could beat Gane. He could beat Jan. That's also another fight we're not even talking about. I think Jan's making a claim to being the best light heavyweight of the last 5 years.
Yeah, he's working his way there.
And part of me does wonder too if the sport sort of like caught up with John. The sport's so young; it's always evolving. I would argue that Dominic Reyes could probably knock out any of the guys that Jones was beating through the late 2010s up until like 2020. I think the sport just evolves so fast, and we have these like athletes coming in like Reyes and
Prochazka.
And
there's the guy, Yuri.
Yeah, he's the other.
Guys come out of nowhere, and that's part of it too.
But yeah, guys like Gane too. These guys who can just come in with 9 fights and they're such good athletes and learn so quickly that they can just beat elite fighters in the division that have been around for a while. So part of me does wonder that, like, if the sport is caught up to him and doesn't really have the same edge that he used to. He's been fighting for 13 years now. It's in the UFC, longer outside the UFC. And so I think the sport does catch up to you, and there's always a bigger fish. And part of me does wonder if that's what's happening or if he's just not motivated. But I'm dying to see. What fan wouldn't want to see him fight Stipe? Even if Stipe is no longer the champ and he's getting up there in age and he's taking.
That doesn't matter for that fight. That's just an incredible fight.
He took a hard loss from Ngannou, but man, I don't think that pay-per-view is going to be breaking records the way it would have if it was Ngannou or if it was Stipe from a couple years ago and John from a couple years ago. But I'm dying to see what happens with that. That was always the big what if. Like, what if could John do this to heavyweights? And I personally, I'm dying to see it.
Yeah, a lot to unpack. I mean, waiting is a part of negotiation. But, I mean, our last segment, we were just talking about the state of the whole UFC. And guys like Gane, who, a month ago we're not even talking about, who were saying beat Volkov by decision, those type of things. And a week later, he's the guy who is kind of dead even line with Francis in their upcoming fight. Things change so quickly. The longer John waits, it's very possible more guys rise up, and it's not just, well, Francis versus Jones. It's what about Francis versus Gane or Francis versus Stipe? And you try to factor in all those fights, you can be looking down like a year and a half or 2 years down the road to even like get an opportunity.
Yeah.
So, that is a huge risk from Jones. Here's something interesting for you. Nate, Connor, and Masvidal, three of the biggest stars in the sport, like selling wise, the number of pay-per-view sales they make, in each of their last two fights combined, they are all 0-6. So the argument for Jones being good compared to selling, I totally get where you're going, but I'm not sure I agree. Just from the standpoint of understanding kind of how to sell fights or get the fans behind you, and people, like to your point of all the stuff that John has done wrong, and thinking about the everyman who's going to work so hard and get a dream come true when John doesn't seem like he could care less and just seems to take it for granted. I mean, people aren't really getting behind him there. It's strange from the perspective of him demanding things from the UFC. I mean, he gave away his light heavyweight belt. I mean, how spoiled are you to just give up your championship for fun and just say, I'm going to do something different? It's not like the UFC said, hey, John, to build your legacy, come to heavyweight. Now, would it build his legacy if he, beats Francis and wins the championship? Absolutely, that's incredible. Does he even need that to be the greatest of all time? Possibly not. I mean, to your point, like, the body of work is already there. He has beaten some absolute killers. But for him to, on his own, give up that belt and then move up and then be making the demands after is still kind of a strange approach to take. I mean, you think these are things you'd figure out before you promise to do it? And I know putting on that weight and the muscle and all that takes time, so maybe you can't make all these concrete promises, but it's just a strange move. I mean, it feels like it's right in front of us because he's put that muscle on. We've seen him training and look powerful, but still the John Jones we think we know, but it also feels so far away.
Yeah. Yeah, him and Dana have always had a tumultuous relationship, and I agree. He has to have thought this through a little bit, right? Like, I think what did he want? $10 million.
Has he shown that with other moves that he's made in his career?
Yeah, fair enough.
I would like to think he did. I mean, I think they were saying a number higher than that, north of 10.
Yeah, and I think he has to know that Dana White's going to say no. Like, there's just no way that he could just make that type of decision and rely on getting paid $10 million to fight.
Well, the thing is, too, is it was for a contract. It was for multiple fights. So you get this Ngannou fight out of the way, and then what? Like Jones versus Derek Lewis, and he's going to get paid, $12 million. Like,
yeah, that's
not an interesting fight, really.
Yeah, and I know we're talking about him not selling, but the guys he's been fighting just haven't had big names recently.
Yep.
I have to look back and see what Jones versus Cormier 2 might have done, or Jones Cormier 1.
Yep.
I can't remember if those were over 1 million buys or not, but
it was a little bit of a different time in the sport. So even if it wasn't, if we moved that to 2021, same age as they were then it probably would.
Yeah, but it's a very weird thing when you break it down. Maybe he knows he can wait, and he actually wants to fight in like January of 2022. But I would really to not agree to the Stipe fight yet. It's making me anxious when Miocic accepted it.
Let me pose something here, and I'm not necessarily suggesting it's true. However, I mean, is John afraid? Does he want his only opportunity to be for the belt because he doesn't want to get caught kind of slipping up there? And that, is the reason you wouldn't take a Stipe fight? Because in my head, I want a warm-up fight. I want to, get used to my muscles and the way I strike and my new speed and in a real fight with someone and get the fans excited to see, this new body of work. But if that flops, then the whole experiment flops. I mean, at least if you get that title fight, get that paycheck with it. If you flop, you flop. But if you win, you're the champion, and that's all there is to it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think he's like scared. I don't think Stipe can hurt him like Francis could hurt him. I don't think he's worried about that. I think he might be worried that fighting Miocic is something that we always talk about. It's like fighting Islam Makhachev when he's not even ranked, and you're someone who's trying to work your way up through the top 10. It's just, what do you gain from it? I think there's probably no one who's like a harder like warm-up fight than Stipe Miocic. And so I think any hopes he has at getting paid over $10 million for a fight would completely go away if he slipped up against Stipe. And maybe he thinks he can be, he might think he matches up better against Ngannou than Stipe. Stipe's just all around all around better wrestler, good striking, better cardio than Francis probably. So the things that Jones is good at, I think Stipe could nullify that. So yeah, I think Jones matches up better against Francis than.
But what if John even says, like, I don't even have to work in the top 3. What if I want Curtis Blades or Volkov or someone who is like that true warm-up fight? Like, he could have done this. He could have put this as part of his plan even. I mean, it just seems like he doesn't want to take the risk, and when you don't want to take the risk, it usually means you're afraid.
Yeah, I think, if he was so blindly confident, maybe you think he could like work something out with Dana White. Like, hey, if I absolutely obliterate Curtis Blades, you pay me $10 million, and me fighting Francis is a mega fight.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that might be. I think he might be scared in that sense because there's a lot of heavyweights that I think are. I think Curtis Blades I think is an even worse matchup for Jones. I think Blades could take him down pretty much at will. Blades is one guy that really has all the tools to be the champ, but just can't seem to put it together.
That's because a guy named Francis has clocked him a couple too many times, but yeah.
Yeah. So I think he knows something that we don't know potentially. I think he thinks he can beat Francis and wants a big paycheck.
Yeah. Yeah. We are in August of 2021. Let's try that again. And I'm hoping by the end of this year we have some type of clarity. I mean, it's crazy how we have guys like Jones and for a while Conor that we talk about nonstop, despite them at points in their career not fighting for so long. And when a fight finally gets announced, and all of us fans are hoping it does, we are going to be so excited because it is what we all want to see.
Yeah.